Hey everybody, it's Angelo Caruso. I thought it would be fun to talk a little bit about, this embarrassing and sometimes demoralizing thing that happens when we're speaking or presenting. Everything's going along just great, and then all of a sudden you black out, right? You just can't remember what to say. You lose your place in your notes. There's this awkward silence. The audience knows there's awkward silence. You realize there's awkward silence, and then all of a sudden that awkward silence becomes impossible to get around, which creates more awkward silence. And so the only way to minimize this is to not have it happen in the first place, and I have some techniques I want to share with you about how to keep that from happening and how you can make this work for yourself. So the first thing to understand is a bit more about how memory works in general. So if, for example, you're speaking without notes and you're blacking out because you forget what to say, you should know that it's easier to remember things when you're attaching your memory to something else to remember, right? So if you're memorizing 10 things, it's actually easier to remember 20 things so that each of the 10 things is attached to something else. And this is completely counterintuitive because you think it would just be easier to remember 10 things. It's not. One time I memorized the United States presidents in order. And I forget when I did this, but let's say when I did it, there were 44 presidents. You would think that that would be hard enough to just remember the names of 44 presidents in order. But what I discovered was it was actually easier to remember 44 presidents if I remembered something about each president. So if you do the math, I'm actually remembering 88 things, right? Twice as many things as you'd think I need to remember, but it was actually easier because of the way that the memory works. Now, memory, of course, is very complicated and it's a lot more involved than we have time to get into in this particular video, but understand there are mechanisms in the brain, such as the reticular activating system, which is the brain's filing cabinet. And this is what allows you to store things in your brain and then retrieve them rather easily, even though you've got a lot of stuff in your head, right? So when it was time to recite the U.S. presidents in order, I could have just said George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, but instead what we end up doing is saying George Washington was the father of our country, but he didn't have any children, right? John Adams was the second president of the United States, and he had a bitter rivalry with Thomas Jefferson, who happened to be the third president of the United States, right? And James Madison was the primary author of the Federalist Papers. So you can just keep doing this all the way along, and it actually makes it easier to remember. Now, reticular activating system and complicated brain mechanisms aside, if you're not focused on your content, if you're distracted by things like being self-conscious, right? Oh my gosh, my hair is a mess today. Because you get to like the third president, you go George Washington, you say George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, oh my God, my hair's a mess today, and then you can't remember James Madison. So it's very important to stay focused and try to stay on the task at hand, which is exceptionally difficult if you stepped away from the podium and you're not using notes or a teleprompter of any kind. By the way, that coincidentally is what makes the speech excellent, is that you're not reading your notes, right? You're speaking from the heart and you're not just reading something off of a teleprompter. So that is why speaking can be a very difficult thing to pull off and seem natural and authentic. So what I want you to start thinking about are two things. One is this idea of how memory really works. And then secondly, find ways to not be distracted. Find ways to focus with laser-like precision on getting through your topic so that you're not, pulled off into that awkward dead space that we see so often in speakers. Now, one final technique I want to talk to you about is called the power of three. And the power of three is based on the fundamental principle that it's easy for the human brain to remember three things, right? This is why most people can't remember phone numbers. A phone number is 7 things, or if you're dealing with an area code, it's 10 things, right? 10 digits. And it's really hard for most brains to get good with that. You know people who are maybe good with numbers, and they can remember a sequence of numbers. Or you know people that are really good with words. Very few people are good with both because they can remember a prose or a poem or some bit of verbiage, right? Because they're really good with language. But if you're not good with language and you're not good with numbers, and you need to give a speech without notes, you want to use the power of 3. And it works like this. You would hold up your hand like this, and you would say, it's the power of, I want to tell you, you wouldn't say it's the power of 3. This is in your head now, right? I'm going to use the power of 3 technique that Michael taught me, right? So you hold up your hand and you say, ladies and gentlemen, there are only 3 things I want to share with you about this particular topic today. You see? And now what happens is this symbol, 3 fingers, becomes a mnemonic device to help you remember what it is that you want to say. And the first finger becomes the first thing that you want to talk about. The second finger, of course, the second thing, and the third finger, the third thing. Now, you might not think this thing that I'm outlining for you right now is particularly helpful, but the idea of even touching your index finger sends a signal to the brain, and if you rehearse it like this, when you get up in front of people, tapping that finger actually signals something to your brain about the first thing you need to remember on this finger, the second thing you need to remember, and the third thing you need to remember. Now, I know people that have a lot of fun with the power of 3. They would actually, put the 3 items in alphabetical order, right? There are 3 things I need you to remember. So the first thing is that I want you to remember what I'm telling you. The second thing is I want you to like it. And the third thing is I want you to go tell people. So watch what I've done. I've taken my hand like this, and if I tilt it so that my fingers are horizontal, I've got head, middle finger down here is heart, and the ring finger is legs. It's actually in alphabetical order. Head, heart, legs is in alphabetical order. I want you to remember this, I want you to like it, and I want you to go tell other people about it. You see what I've done? I've also arranged it by doing this top to bottom. Yet another way for me to remember the 3 things I need to tell you, right? Top down, head, heart, legs, right? When I'm down south and I say to the group, as you see, the way I've arranged the topics is now spatial. And all the people down south go, yeah, it sure is spatial. Spatial. So you can have a lot of fun with the power of 3, whether you do it like this or like this. But in any event, your end game is to not be distracted and not forget what you're talking about so that you're not embarrassed and ultimately demoralized. If you think I'm making this more dramatic than it needs to be, remember the last time that you blacked out in front of an audience. At first, live, you're embarrassed. Wow, I don't know how I could forget what I was talking about. I've rehearsed this so much. And then later you say to yourself, I don't ever want to present again. That's different than embarrassment, ladies and gentlemen. That is demoralizing. And I never, ever want you to have that feeling. So I have a couple of suggestions for you. The first is to watch this video again so it sinks into your cabeza, right, about how memory works. And then the second thing I want you to do is join my Facebook group. It's called Present Like a Pro. It's free. And I will reach out to you a couple times a week and give you some things to think about as you're getting ready for your next presentation, as you're reviewing a presentation that you just had recently. And we're going to get you all tooled up. A second invitation I have for you is to subscribe to this YouTube channel so that you can be notified of all new videos. And finally, invitation number 3, if you are good with language, I want you to subscribe to my blog at michaelangelocaruso.com, and we'll make sure that you're thinking and immersed in this presentation skills set so that you're always taking your presentations to the next level. It's extremely important if you're a leader, a role model. It's extremely important if you're a commissioned salesperson because you're feeding your children based on how well you give presentations. So let's make sure your children are well fed, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you again soon.